Imagine this. You're living the dream life in a sprawling Malibu mansion, 7 months pregnant with your first child, married to a charming millionaire who's given you everything. But one afternoon, you walk in on a scene that shatters your world, your husband entangled with your best friend, whispering plans to erase you from the picture. What starts as a heartbreaking betrayal spirals into a nightmare of locked doors, stolen finances, gaslighting, and a ruthless fight for your unborn baby's future. Will Sarah escape her gilded prison, expose the web of lies, and rise from the ashes like a phoenix? Or will her controlling husband destroy her completely? Stay tuned for The Gilded Prison, a story of betrayal and redemption. A gripping tale of survival and empowerment that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If this hooks you, smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts on the biggest twist, share with a friend who loves drama, and subscribe for more epic stories like this. Let's dive in. Sarah Mitchell placed her manicured hand on her rounded belly as she pulled into the circular driveway of her Malibu mansion. At 32 and 7 months pregnant, she should have been glowing with anticipation. Instead, exhaustion weighed heavily on her shoulders like an expensive cashmere shawl that had lost its warmth. The doctor's appointment had ended earlier than expected. Dr. Martinez had been pleased with the baby's development, but concerned about Sarah's elevated stress levels. "You need to find ways to relax, Mrs. Mitchell," she had advised. "This level of anxiety isn't healthy for you or the baby." Sarah had nodded politely. But how could she explain that relaxation felt impossible when living with David had become like walking on broken glass? Her millionaire husband had grown increasingly controlling over the past few months, monitoring her every move, questioning her every decision. As she approached the front door, something caught her eye. Victoria's silver BMW was parked near the side entrance, partially hidden by the perfectly manicured hedges. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Victoria Sterling had been her closest friend since college, the maid of honor at her wedding, the godmother designate for her unborn child. But lately, Victoria had been acting strangely distant, canceling their lunch dates and avoiding Sarah's calls. Sarah decided to surprise them both. She rarely used the side entrance, but today felt different. Maybe she could finally understand what had been troubling her best friend. The marble floors of the Mitchell mansion gleamed under the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Sarah kicked off her designer heels, grateful for the cool stone beneath her swollen feet. The house felt eerily quiet, which was unusual. David typically worked from his home office with music playing, and the housekeeper always had the afternoon news on in the kitchen. As Sarah climbed the curved staircase, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Soft laughter. Female laughter, coming from her bedroom. Her hand gripped the mahogany banister as she moved closer to the master suite. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, she could see movement on the bed she had shared with David for 5 years. What Sarah saw next shattered her world into a million pieces. David, her husband of 5 years, was intimately entwined with Victoria, her best friend, on the silk sheet Sarah had picked out for their anniversary. Victoria's blonde hair was spread across Sarah's pillow, and David's hands were caressing skin that wasn't his wife's. "I can't wait much longer," Victoria whispered breathlessly. "When are you going to tell her?" "Soon," David replied, his voice holding a tenderness Sarah hadn't heard in months. "Once the baby comes and the custody arrangements are settled, everything will be different. Sarah won't be a problem anymore." Sarah felt her knees buckle. The crystal vase on the hallway table crashed to the floor as she grabbed for support, the sound echoing through the mansion like thunder. Water and glass shards scattered across the marble, mixing with her tears as they began to fall. The bedroom door flew open. David appeared, hastily wrapping a towel around his waist, his face twisted with anger rather than shame. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing sneaking around the house?" His voice boomed through the hallway, making Sarah flinch. Victoria emerged behind him, wearing Sarah's silk robe, her expression a mixture of defiance and calculated coldness. "Sarah, honey, this isn't what it looks like." "Isn't what it looks like." Sarah's voice cracked as she struggled to stand. You're in my bed, wearing my robe, planning my life like I don't exist. David stepped forward, his jaw clenched. You have no right to spy on me in my own house. This is a violation of privacy. Sarah, you're being completely irrational. Irrational. Sarah's voice rose to a pitch she didn't recognize. I'm pregnant with your child, and you're having an affair with my best friend. How is that irrational? See? Victoria said softly to David, her voice dripping with false concern. I told you she's been acting unstable lately. Maybe the pregnancy hormones are affecting her more than we thought. Sarah stared at her former best friend in disbelief. Unstable Victoria, you were supposed to be my maid of honor. You helped me pick out the baby's nursery. How long has this been going on? Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Long enough to know that David deserves better than a clingy, paranoid wife who can't handle the pressures of being married to a successful man. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the baby kick as if responding to her distress. Rain had started falling outside, pattering against the windows with increasing intensity. I want you both out of my house, Sarah said, her voice steadying with determination. Now! David laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Your house, Sarah. Let me remind you of something. This house is in my name. The cars are in my name. The bank accounts are in my name. You have nothing without me. That's not true, Sarah whispered. But even as she said it, she realized with growing horror that it might be. During their marriage, David had gradually taken control of all their finances, claiming it was easier for his business. She had been so focused on being the perfect wife and preparing for motherhood that she had let him handle everything. I'm going to pack my things, Sarah announced, moving toward their walk-in closet. David's hand shot out, gripping her wrist tightly. No, you're not. David, you're hurting me. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. You're not going anywhere with my child, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I've worked too hard building my life to let you destroy it with your emotional instability. Victoria watched the scene with detached interest, as if she were observing a particularly dramatic television show rather than the destruction of her supposed best friend's life. Please, Sarah begged, just let me go to my sister's house. I need time to think. Thinking is exactly what you don't need right now, David replied. You need professional help, Sarah, and until you get it, you're staying right here where I can keep an eye on you. Before Sarah could react, David was dragging her down the hallway toward the guest bedroom, the room they had planned to convert into a nursery. The irony wasn't lost on her as David pushed her inside. David, please don't do this, Sarah pleaded, but he was already closing the door. She heard the distinctive click of the electronic lock engaging. David had installed smart locks throughout the house last year, claiming it was for security. Now Sarah realized it had been for control. Let me out, she screamed, pounding on the door. You can't keep me locked up like a prisoner. You'll stay there until you calm down and we can discuss this rationally. David's voice came through the door. Victoria is going to help me find you a good therapist. Someone who specializes in pregnancy-related psychological issues. Sarah sank to the floor, her back against the locked door, and finally allowed herself to cry. Outside, the storm was intensifying, rain lashing against the windows like tears from heaven itself, in slow motion. Each drop seemed to mirror her own falling tears as her perfect life crumbled around her. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if reminding Sarah that she wasn't alone. She placed both hands on her belly and whispered, I'm going to get us out of here. Little one, I promise. But as night fell and the house grew quiet except for occasional murmurs from David and Victoria's room, Sarah began to realize that escaping her gilded prison might be far more difficult than she had ever imagined. 18 hours had passed since David locked Sarah in the guest bedroom, and what had started as shock had evolved into a suffocating panic that seemed to be affecting her pregnancy. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her swollen belly, trying to calm the baby who had been unusually active since her confinement began. The room that was supposed to become a nursery now felt like a beautifully appointed prison cell. Designer wallpaper and soft pastels mocked her situation, and the expensive furniture that had once represented hopes and dreams now felt like barriers to her freedom. Sarah had tried everything. She had called out until her voice was hoarse. She had pounded on the door until her knuckles were raw. She had even attempted to disable the smart lock using her phone, but David had apparently changed the access codes. As dawn broke through the silk curtains, Sarah finally reached for her phone to check their joint bank account, hoping to at least understand her financial situation. What she discovered made her stomach lurch with a sickness that had nothing to do with pregnancy. All their joint accounts showed a balance of zero. Her credit cards had been canceled. Even her small personal savings account, which contained her inheritance from her grandmother, had been emptied. David had been thorough in his financial betrayal of their millionaire marriage. "How could I have been so blind?" Sarah whispered to herself, remembering all the times David had insisted on handling their finances. "It's just easier this way, honey," he had always said. "You focus on being beautiful and making our home perfect. I'll handle the money." She had been flattered by what she thought was his desire to protect and provide for her. Now she realized it had been about control all along. The baby's movements became more agitated, and Sarah felt a sharp pain in her lower back. She tried to breathe through it, but the combination of stress, dehydration, and 18 hours of confinement was taking its toll on both mother and child. "David," she called out, her voice cracking with desperation. "Something's wrong with the baby. Please, I need to get to a hospital." Silence. Sarah pressed her ear to the door and heard muffled voices from downstairs. David and Victoria were having breakfast, discussing her situation as if she were a problem to be solved, rather than a human being in distress. The pain in her back intensified, and Sarah felt the first flutter of real fear for her unborn child. She had to get out of this room, out of this house, and away from the man who had systematically dismantled her life while she was busy planning their future together. Her eyes fell on the Crystal Award David had received for Tech Entrepreneur of the Year sitting on the dresser. It was heavy, substantial, and at this moment, it represented the weight of all his lies and manipulations. Sarah picked up the award and looked at the window. The guest bedroom was on the second floor, but there was a small balcony just below that connected to David's home office. If she could break the window and climb out carefully, she might be able to escape without seriously injuring herself or the baby. "Forgive me, little one," she whispered, placing one hand protectively over her belly. "But we have to get out of here." Sarah wrapped the Crystal Award in a pillowcase to muffle the sound and struck the window as hard as she could. The first blow created a spider web of cracks. The second blow sent shards of glass cascading onto the balcony below. She carefully knocked out the remaining glass and threw the pillows out first to cushion her landing. Then, moving as carefully as her pregnant body allowed, Sarah began to climb through the window. The broken glass caught her hands and arms, leaving bloody streaks on her skin. She didn't care. Each cut represented her determination to escape this nightmare. The white silk curtains that had once symbolized elegance and luxury were now stained with her blood, a stark reminder of how her perfect life had been built on lies. Sarah dropped onto the balcony, her knees buckling from the impact. Pain shot through her back and abdomen, but she forced herself to keep moving. She climbed down the trellis that supported Victoria's favorite climbing roses, another bitter irony, and finally reached the ground. Her neighbor's house was only 50 yards away, but it felt like miles as Sarah stumbled across the perfectly manicured lawn in her bloodied nightgown. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who had always been kind to Sarah, answered her frantic knocking immediately. "My God, Sarah, what happened to you?" "Please," Sarah gasped. "I need to call 911. My husband. He locked me in a room. I think something's wrong with the baby." Mrs. Henderson's face went pale as she helped Sarah inside and handed her the phone. As Sarah dialed, she could see David's house through the window, looking peaceful and perfect from the outside. betraying nothing of the domestic prison it had become. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Sarah Mitchell. My husband locked me in a room for 18 hours and I'm 7 months pregnant. I had to break a window to escape, and I think I need medical attention. Ma'am, we're sending both police and paramedics to your location. Can you stay on the line? As Sarah gave her location, she saw David's front door open. He emerged in his expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman, followed by Victoria, who had styled her hair and applied makeup as if preparing for a photo shoot. But instead of rushing to help his injured pregnant wife, David was on his phone, and within minutes, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the house. Sarah watched in disbelief as an older man in an expensive suit emerged, David's lawyer, Mr. Blackstone. By the time the police and paramedics arrived at Mrs. Henderson's house, David, Victoria, and the lawyer were already walking across the lawn with calm, measured steps. "Officers," David called out in his most authoritative voice. "I'm David Mitchell, Sarah's husband. I'm afraid we're dealing with a very difficult situation here." Sarah watched from Mrs. Henderson's window as David painted a picture of a mentally unstable pregnant woman who had become paranoid and destructive. Victoria nodded along, playing the role of the concerned friend who had witnessed Sarah's episodes of irrational behavior. "She's been having these outbursts for weeks," Victoria told the officers with practiced concern. "David called me over because he was worried about her state of mind. When we tried to talk to her about getting professional help, she became violent and locked herself in the guest room." "That's not true," Sarah protested as the paramedics examined her cuts. "He locked me in there. Check the smart lock records." Mr. Blackstone stepped forward smoothly. "Officers, my client is very concerned about his wife's mental state. She's been exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior, which we believe may be related to pregnancy-induced psychological changes. The important thing right now is getting Mrs. Mitchell the professional help she needs." Sarah felt her world spinning as she realized how carefully this had been orchestrated. David hadn't just locked her away on impulse. He had planned this, probably for weeks. The lawyer's immediate availability, Victoria's prepared responses, even the way they had positioned themselves as the concerned parties trying to help an unstable woman. "Mrs. Mitchell," one of the officers said gently, "we need to ask you some questions about what happened today." As Sarah tried to explain the truth about her imprisonment and her husband's affair, she could see the doubt in the officer's eyes. Here was David Mitchell, a respected businessman in a $1,000 suit with his lawyer and a witness backing up his story. And here was Sarah, bloodied and emotional in a torn nightgown, making claims that sounded increasingly desperate even to her own ears. The paramedic checking her vital signs frowned. "Ma'am, your blood pressure is dangerously elevated, and I'm detecting some irregularities in your heartbeat. We need to get you to the hospital immediately." As they loaded Sarah into the ambulance, she saw Victoria place a comforting hand on David's arm, playing the role of the supportive friend helping a man deal with his troubled wife. The performance was flawless, and Sarah realized with growing horror that this was just the beginning of a much larger game. "David," she called out as the ambulance doors began to close, "you can't do this to me. I'm carrying your child." David approached the ambulance, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw a flicker of the man she had married. But when he spoke, his voice was cold and calculated. "Sarah, I want you to get the help you need. Victoria and I will make sure everything is taken care of while you focus on getting better." As the ambulance pulled away, Sarah caught a glimpse of Victoria and David standing together in front of their mansion, looking like the perfect couple dealing with a family crisis. The sight made her stomach lurch with a nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. At the hospital, as doctors examined her and confirmed that the baby was still safe despite everything, Sarah tried to piece together how her life had unraveled so completely in less than 24 hours. But the worst realization was yet to come. When the nurse brought her a fresh gown and helped her get cleaned up, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. She was bleeding, not from her cuts, but in a way that suggested her pregnancy might be in serious jeopardy. Nurse, she whispered, pointing to the spots of blood on her hospital gown. Something's wrong. The emergency room at Cedar-Sinai Medical Center buzzed with the controlled chaos typical of a Saturday evening. But for Sarah, lying on the examination table with monitors beeping around her, the world had narrowed to one terrifying possibility, that she might lose her baby. Dr. Jennifer Patel, the attending obstetrician, had been monitoring Sarah's condition for 2 hours. The ultrasound had shown that the baby was still safe, but Sarah's stress levels were off the charts, and the bleeding, while not immediately dangerous, was a warning sign that couldn't be ignored. Mrs. Mitchell, Dr. Patel said gently, physically, both you and your baby are going to be fine. However, I'm very concerned about your psychological state. The level of stress you're experiencing could lead to serious complications if it continues. Sarah tried to focus on the doctor's words, but her mind kept replaying the scene at her house. David's cold manipulation, Victoria's betrayal, the way they had turned her desperate escape into evidence of mental instability. The heartbreaking family drama was unfolding exactly as they had planned. Doctor, you have to understand, Sarah said, gripping the bed rails. My husband locked me in a room for 18 hours. I'm not having a psychological breakdown. I'm a victim of domestic abuse. Dr. Patel's expression softened with sympathy, but Sarah could see the professional skepticism in her eyes. How many women came through these doors claiming abuse from wealthy, respected husbands? How many of those claims seemed credible when the husband appeared calm and concerned, while the wife seemed frantic and desperate? Mrs. Mitchell, I want to help you, but I need you to be honest with me. Have you been experiencing any depression, anxiety, or unusual thoughts during your pregnancy? Before Sarah could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. A nurse entered, followed by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Maria Santos from the hospital's social work department. Dr. Patel asked me to speak with you about some resources that might be helpful. Maria was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. She pulled up a chair beside the bed and spoke in a voice that was both professional and warm. Sarah, may I call you Sarah? I understand you're going through a very difficult time right now. Dr. Patel has shared some of what happened today, and I want you to know that there are people who can help you. For the first time in 24 hours, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. You believe me. I believe that you're scared and that you need a safe place to figure out your next steps, Maria replied carefully. Whether what happened today was a misunderstanding or something more serious, you have options. Maria explained the resources available through the hospital's domestic violence program. There was a women's shelter that specialized in helping pregnant women escape abusive situations. They could provide temporary housing, legal advocacy, and counseling services. The most important thing right now is making sure you and your baby are safe, Maria continued. Everything else can be sorted out once you're in a secure environment. For the first time since discovering David's affair, Sarah felt like she could breathe. A women's shelter wasn't the life she had planned, but it was a way out of the golden cage that had become her marriage. I want to go there, Sarah said decisively. Tonight, if possible, Maria smiled. I can make that happen. Let me just speak with Dr. Patel about your discharge, and then we'll get you situated. As Maria left to make arrangements, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a different future. She was a college-educated woman with a background in marketing. Before her marriage, she had been independent and capable. She could rebuild her life, raise her child, and maybe even find happiness again. The fantasy sustained her through the discharge process and the drive to the Women's Haven shelter on the outskirts of Los Angeles. The facility was modest but clean, housed in a converted apartment complex with security gates and cameras. A stark contrast to the luxury she had grown accustomed to, but infinitely preferable to the beautiful prison David had created. Sarah's assigned counselor, Janet Morrison, was a survivor herself who had rebuilt her life after leaving an abusive marriage 20 years earlier. The first thing you need to understand, Janet explained as she helped Sarah settle into her small but comfortable room, is that healing from this kind of betrayal takes time. You've experienced financial betrayal in your millionaire marriage, emotional manipulation, and physical confinement. Your mind and body need time to process all of that. That night, as Sarah lay in the narrow bed listening to the sounds of other women beginning their own journeys to freedom, she felt stronger than she had in months. She had escaped. She had sought help. She was taking control of her life. For 3 days, Sarah thrived in the shelter environment. She attended support group meetings where she met other women who had faced similar betrayals from wealthy, controlling husbands. She worked with Janet to develop a plan for establishing her independence. She even began to research job opportunities in marketing, excited about the prospect of rebuilding her career. The other residents became like sisters to her. There was Carmen, whose tech executive husband had isolated her from her family for years. Lisa, whose attorney husband had convinced everyone she was mentally ill when she discovered his embezzlement. Maria, whose doctor husband had controlled every aspect of her life under the guise of protecting her health. The thing about men like our husbands, Carmen observed during one evening group session, is that they're so good at making everyone else believe we're the problem. They have money, status, respectability. We just have the truth, and sometimes that doesn't feel like enough. But Sarah felt empowered by the truth. She was documenting everything. David's financial manipulations, the circumstances of her imprisonment, Victoria's role in the deception. With the help of the shelter's legal advocate, she was preparing to file for divorce and seek full custody of her child. On Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after her escape, Sarah was in the shelter's common room working on her resume when Janet approached with a concerned expression. "Sarah, there are some people here to see you. They say they have legal documents." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Legal documents about what? I think you should speak with them yourself. They're waiting in the conference room with our legal advocate." Sarah entered the conference room to find 3 people she recognized with growing dread. David's lawyer, Mr. Blackstone, was there with a woman she didn't know who introduced herself as a court-appointed psychologist. Most shocking of all was the third person, a judge, there to oversee what they were calling an emergency custody hearing. "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Harrison said gravely, "I've reviewed some very concerning evidence about your mental state and your fitness as a parent. These proceedings are being conducted here, rather than in a traditional courtroom, due to concerns about your psychological stability." Sarah felt the room spinning. "What evidence? What are you talking about?" Mr. Blackstone opened a thick folder and began presenting what he called documented proof of Sarah's deteriorating mental health. There were medical records she had never seen suggesting a history of postpartum depression risk factors. Security footage from their home that had been edited to show her appearing agitated and confrontational, including the scene where she discovered David's affair, but edited to remove all context. Most damaging were the witness statements. Victoria had provided a detailed account of Sarah's increasingly erratic behavior over the past several months. David had submitted documentation of Sarah's paranoid delusions about their finances. Despite his attempts to help her understand their financial situation, even more shocking were statements from people Sarah considered friends and family. Her own mother had signed an affidavit expressing concern about Sarah's mental state and agreeing that temporary custody arrangements might be necessary for the baby's safety. "This is all lies," Sarah protested, but even to her own ears, her voice sounded desperate and unhinged. "They're manipulating everything to make me look crazy." The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, spoke in a calm, clinical tone. "Mrs. Mitchell, your reaction right now, the paranoid ideation, the belief that multiple people are conspiring against you, supports the concerns outlined in these documents." "But they are conspiring against me," Sarah insisted. "My husband was having an affair with my best friend. He locked me in a room. He stole all our money." Judge Harrison reviewed the paperwork with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Mitchell, given the evidence presented and your current state of agitation, I'm ordering that you be placed in a supervised residential facility for psychological evaluation. This is temporary, pending a full custody hearing once you've received appropriate treatment. Sarah felt her knees giving out. You can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm the victim here. Mrs. Mitchell, the psychologist said gently, resisting help and continuing to blame others for your situation are symptoms of the very condition we're trying to treat. The facility we've selected specializes in pregnancy-related psychological issues. You'll receive excellent care. As security personnel entered the room to escort Sarah to the facility, she caught a glimpse through the window of a familiar silver BMW in the parking lot. Victoria was waiting outside, probably ready to comfort David as he dealt with his mentally ill wife. The facility, called Serenity Hills, was essentially a luxurious prison. It had the appearance of a high-end wellness retreat, but Sarah quickly realized that she couldn't leave, couldn't make unsupervised phone calls, and couldn't see visitors without approval from her treatment team. As Sarah sat in her comfortable but monitored room that evening, staring at legal papers that stripped away her freedom in the name of helping her, she finally understood the true scope of David's manipulation. This wasn't a crime of passion or even a simple affair. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to steal her life, her child, and her future. Outside her window, rain began to fall, and Sarah watched each drop trace its path down the glass like tears. Her reflection looked back at her, a broken woman in a sterile room, her dreams shattered, her trust destroyed, her very sanity being questioned by everyone who was supposed to protect her. But as she placed her hands on her belly and felt her baby's reassuring kick, Sarah made a silent promise. She would find a way to fight back. She would expose David's lies and reclaim her life. She had to, because now she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for her child's future. The war for her freedom was just beginning, and Sarah was determined to win it, no matter what it cost her. The next morning brought a visitor that Sarah wasn't expecting. Victoria, looking perfectly composed and carrying what appeared to be a gift basket. "Hello, Sarah," Victoria said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought you might like some company." Victoria settled into the visitor's chair with the grace of someone attending a social lunch rather than visiting a friend who had been institutionalized. She was wearing a flowing designer dress that perfectly concealed what Sarah now realized must be the early stages of pregnancy. "You look well, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false concern. "The staff here seems lovely. David spared no expense making sure you'd be comfortable while you get the help you need." Sarah studied her former best friend's face, searching for any trace of the woman who had been her maid of honor, who had helped her choose baby names, who had promised to be there through everything. What she saw instead was a stranger wearing Victoria's face. "How long?" Sarah asked quietly. "How long what?" "Honey." Victoria's tone was patronizing, as if she were speaking to a confused child. "How long have you been planning this? The affair, the pregnancy, taking over my life. How long has this been in the works?" Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. Then she smiled, the expression sharp as a blade. "Oh, Sarah, you always were too trusting, weren't you? Did you really think David was happy being married to someone so ordinary?" The word hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Ordinary. Come on, Sarah. You gave up your career, your independence, your identity to play house with a man who was destined for greatness. David needed a partner who could match his ambition, not someone who was content to plan charity galas and pick out curtains." Victoria stood and moved to the window, her hand resting casually on her still flat stomach. "I've been helping David with his business for over a year now. Real consulting work, not the kind of decorative support you provided. We discovered we had so much in common: ambition, vision, the ability to make hard decisions. Hard decisions like destroying your best friend's life." Victoria turned back to Sarah with a look of genuine puzzlement. "Destroying Sarah. We're freeing you. You were never happy being married to someone like David, even if you were too limited to realize it. Now you can focus on being the kind of mother you're meant to be, without the pressures of trying to be something you're not. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as the true scope of the betrayal became clear. You planned this whole thing. The mental health accusations, the facility, everything. David is a visionary. Sarah, he thinks 10 steps ahead of everyone else. That's what makes him so successful. Victoria's voice held an admiration that Sarah remembered being directed at her own husband. When he realized our marriage was inevitable, he wanted to make sure the transition would be as smooth as possible for everyone involved. Your marriage, Sarah's voice cracked. You're talking about marrying my husband while I'm still legally married to him. Details, sweetie. David's lawyers are handling all the paperwork. By the time you're released from this facility, which could be months, according to Dr. Martinez, everything will be finalized. You'll get a very generous settlement. Of course, David isn't heartless. Victoria returned to her chair and leaned forward conspiratorially. The beautiful thing is, everyone believes you're having a psychological breakdown. Your own mother signed papers saying she was concerned about your mental state. Your sister hasn't even returned David's calls because she's so embarrassed by your behavior. Sarah felt the room tilting around her. My family doesn't believe me. Sarah, honey, look at yourself. You broke a window, injured yourself, made wild accusations about David locking you up, which the security footage clearly shows isn't true. You claim he stole money that was always in his name. You're in a psychiatric facility making paranoid accusations about conspiracies. Who would believe you? The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice was breathtaking. This was the woman who had helped Sarah pick out her wedding dress, who had held her hair back when morning sickness hit, who had promised to love Sarah's baby like her own. There's something else you should know, Victoria continued, her hand moving to her stomach again. I'm about 3 months along, due in the spring. David is absolutely thrilled. He says it proves we were meant to be together. Sarah felt something inside her break at those words. Not just her heart, but something deeper, her faith in human goodness, her ability to trust her own judgment, her belief that the world made sense. Why? Sarah whispered. We were friends. I loved you like a sister. Why would you do this to me? Victoria tilted her head as if considering the question seriously. Because I could, Sarah. Because David deserves better than a woman who peaked in college and never had the ambition to be anything more than decorative. Because I'm pregnant with his child and you're just an obstacle to our family's future. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Sarah, the custody hearing is scheduled for next month. David's lawyers are confident that given your current situation and medical history, supervised visitation will be the best outcome you can hope for. But don't worry, I'll make sure your daughter knows her real mother tried her best. After Victoria left, Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just learned. This wasn't a crime of passion or even a simple affair. This was a calculated takeover of her entire life, orchestrated by the two people she had trusted most. That evening, during her mandated therapy session with Dr. Martinez, Sarah tried to explain what Victoria had revealed, but even to her own ears, the story sounded like the paranoid delusions of someone suffering from a psychological break. Sarah, Dr. Martinez said gently, I know you believe these things happen the way you're describing them, but we need to focus on your healing, not on blame and conspiracy theories. But what if they're not conspiracy theories? What if Victoria and David really did plan this whole thing? Even if that were true, which seems highly unlikely given the evidence, focusing on it isn't helping your mental health or your pregnancy. We need to work on accepting your current situation and finding healthy ways to cope. That night, as Sarah lay in her monitored bed listening to the soft sounds of the facility's night shift, she felt a level of despair she hadn't known was possible. Victoria was right about one thing. Who would believe her? Her own family had turned against her. The legal system saw her as mentally unstable. The medical professionals treating her viewed her claims as symptoms of illness rather than testimony about abuse. But as she placed her hands on her belly and felt her daughter's strong kicks, Sarah made a decision. She might be trapped in this facility, branded as mentally ill and facing the loss of everything she held dear. But she was still this baby's mother, and she would find a way to fight for both of them. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, a man Sarah didn't recognize who introduced himself as Marcus Chen, an attorney who specialized in cases involving wealthy, manipulative spouses. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, settling into the visitor's chair, I've been following your case, and I believe you're being systematically abused by your husband and his associates. I'd like to help you. Sarah studied his face, afraid to hope. How do I know you're not another one of David's people? Marcus smiled grimly. Because I'm here without the facility's permission. I'm not billing anyone for this visit, and I have some information about your husband that I think you'll find very interesting. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. David Mitchell has done this before. Mrs. Mitchell and his previous wife is very interested in helping you. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a flicker of genuine hope. But she had learned to be cautious of hope. It had been weaponized against her too many times already. What do you mean, he's done this before? Your husband's first wife, Jennifer Walsh, went through something remarkably similar to what you're experiencing. False mental health accusations, isolation from family and friends, a custody battle she was set up to lose. The main difference is that she didn't have a friend involved in the betrayal. Marcus pulled out a photograph of a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. Similar age to Sarah, similar background, even similar features. Jennifer would like to meet with you, if you're interested. She has information that could change everything. As Sarah stared at the photograph, she realized that David's pattern ran deeper than simple infidelity. He was a predator who targeted specific types of women and used the same playbook to destroy them when they were no longer useful to him. Mr. Chen, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger, I want to fight back, but I need to know, is there really a chance of winning against someone with David's resources and connections? Marcus's expression grew determined. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband made one crucial mistake. He assumed you were as powerless as you appeared, but you're not alone anymore. And you're definitely not powerless. We're going to take him down. But even as Sarah felt hope beginning to bloom in her chest, she couldn't shake the feeling that David was still several steps ahead of them. That night, she experienced sharp pains in her abdomen that sent her to the facility's medical wing. The blood work came back showing traces of a mild sedative in her system, something that shouldn't have been there. Something that could explain why she had been feeling so lethargic and confused during her sessions with Dr. Martinez. Someone had been drugging her food, making her appear more unstable than she actually was, creating evidence to support David's narrative about her mental health. As Sarah realized the true depth of the conspiracy against her, she felt both terror and a strange sense of vindication. She wasn't losing her mind. She was being systematically poisoned and gaslit by people who wanted to steal her life and her child. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Sarah knew she had weapons to fight back with. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had seen many women like Sarah Mitchell walk through the doors of her private practice over the years. Successful, intelligent women who had somehow lost themselves in marriages to powerful, controlling men. But there was something different about Sarah. A spark of defiance that hadn't been completely extinguished despite everything she had endured. Elena's office was a sanctuary designed to help women rediscover their strength. Warm earth tones, comfortable seating, and walls lined with books about female empowerment and recovery from abuse. It was here that Sarah began to understand the true scope of what had happened to her. Sarah, Elena said during their first session, I want you to understand that nothing you're experiencing is your fault. Financial betrayal in millionaire marriages is more common than most people realize, and the tactics your husband has used follow a very predictable pattern. Elena had taken Sarah's case after Marcus Chen contacted her. She specialized in helping women overcome financial and emotional abuse in high-net-worth marriages, and she had agreed to provide therapy sessions at the facility where Sarah was being held. But how did I not see it? Sarah asked, her voice filled with self-recrimination. How did I let myself become so dependent, so blind to what was happening? Because David is what we call a sophisticated abuser, Elena explained. He didn't start with violence or obvious control. He began by making you feel special, chosen, protected. He gradually took over your finances under the guise of taking care of you. He isolated you from your career and independence by convincing you that being his wife was a full-time job. Elena pulled out a book from her shelf, The Good Wife's Guide to Getting Even, by a famous psychologist who specialized in helping women reclaim their power after betrayal. I want you to read this, Elena said. Not because I think you should get revenge, but because it will help you understand that you're not the first intelligent woman to be manipulated by a master manipulator, and you won't be the last. Over the following weeks, Sarah's sessions with Elena became a lifeline. Elena helped her recognize the gradual erosion of her independence that had occurred during her marriage, how David had discouraged her from maintaining friendships outside their social circle, how he had convinced her that managing their household was more important than her career, how he had gradually taken control of every aspect of their life together. It's like that story about the frog in boiling water, Sarah realized during one session. If you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out immediately. But if you put it in cool water and gradually heat it up, the frog doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late. Exactly, Elena confirmed. And now that you're out of the pot, you can see clearly what was happening to you. Marcus had provided Elena with the results of the blood test showing sedatives in Sarah's system. Armed with this evidence, Elena was able to convince the facility's administrators to investigate Sarah's food service. They discovered that someone had been bribing a kitchen worker to add mild sedatives to Sarah's meals, enough to make her appear drowsy and confused during therapy sessions, but not enough to cause obvious harm to her pregnancy. The kitchen worker, facing potential criminal charges, admitted that he had been paid by Victoria Sterling to drug Sarah's food. This revelation was the first crack in David's carefully constructed narrative about Sarah's mental instability. This changes everything, Elena told Sarah as they reviewed the evidence. We now have proof that your apparent psychological symptoms were artificially induced. This is going to be crucial for your custody case. Elena also introduced Sarah to other women who had faced similar situations. There was Rebecca, whose pharmaceutical executive husband had convinced everyone she was addicted to prescription drugs while he was actually switching her medications. There was Amanda, whose investment banker husband had hidden assets offshore while claiming they were facing financial difficulties. The thing about men like our husbands, Rebecca shared during a group session Elena facilitated, is that they're incredibly skilled at playing the victim. They make everyone feel sorry for them. The successful man dealing with an unstable wife, the devoted father trying to protect his children from their mother's mental illness. Sarah found strength in these women's stories, but she also began to understand the unique challenges she faced. David's wealth and connections gave him advantages that most abusers didn't have. He could afford the best lawyers, the most convincing expert witnesses, the most sophisticated manipulation tactics. Elena helped Sarah develop what she called a recovery plan, not just for healing from the trauma, but for rebuilding her life and identity. You need to remember who you were before David, Elena told her. You were a successful marketing executive. You had friends, interests, goals of your own. That woman is still inside you. Sarah, we just need to help her remember how to be strong. Elena recommended several books that became Sarah's lifeline during the long evenings at the facility. Eat, Pray, Love helped her understand that it was possible to rebuild a life after devastating betrayal. Women Who Run with the Wolves taught her about reclaiming her primal feminine power. Why does he do that? Opened her eyes to the psychology of abusive men. But even as Sarah began to feel stronger and more clear-headed, David escalated his campaign against her. One morning, Elena arrived at the facility with a grim expression and a tablet in her hands. Sarah, I need to prepare you for something, Elena said gently. David has released some edited security footage on social media. It's gone viral. The video showed carefully edited clips of Sarah appearing to be aggressive toward household staff members. The context had been removed, making her look unstable and potentially violent. The footage had been posted with hashtags like crazy pregnant wife and wealthy wife breakdown, and it was being shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Sarah watched in horror as her most vulnerable moments were turned into entertainment for strangers on the internet. Comments ranged from mockery to armchair psychiatric diagnoses, and many people were praising David for trying to get his wife help. "He's destroyed my reputation," Sarah whispered, staring at the screen. "Even if I prove my innocence in court, this will follow me forever." "This is actually good news," Elena said, surprising Sarah. "David is getting desperate. He wouldn't release this footage unless he was worried about losing control of the narrative. It means our strategy is working." Elena explained that the release of the video was likely a reaction to the discovery of the drugging scheme. David knew that evidence was mounting against him, so he was trying to poison public opinion before the truth could come out. "We're going to use this against him," Elena promised. "Marcus has already filed a motion to have the full, unedited security footage released as evidence. When people see what really happened in those situations, it's going to backfire on David spectacularly." But the social media attacks took their toll on Sarah's family relationships. Her mother called the facility, not to offer support, but to express her embarrassment about the video. "Sarah, how could you let yourself get to this point?" her mother asked during the brief, supervised phone call. "Your father and I are mortified. Everyone in our community has seen this video. Mom, that footage was edited to make me look bad. David is lying about everything. Sarah, honey, I think you need to focus on getting better instead of making up stories about David. He's been nothing but patient and caring through this whole ordeal." The conversation ended with Sarah's mother suggesting that maybe David and Victoria were right about Sarah needing long-term psychiatric care. Even worse was the call from Sarah's sister, Jennifer, who had been her closest family member before her marriage to David. "Sarah, I've been trying to be supportive, but this video, I don't know what to think anymore. Maybe you should consider that David and the doctors might be right about your mental state. Jenny, you've known me my whole life. Do you really think I'm capable of what that video suggests? I don't know what to think anymore. Sarah, you've been making these wild accusations about David and Victoria, and now this footage shows you acting exactly the way they said you were acting? Maybe the pregnancy has affected you more than any of us realized." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a level of isolation that was almost unbearable. The two people she had trusted most, David and Victoria, had betrayed her completely. Now even her own family was turning against her, believing the carefully crafted lies over her desperate attempts to tell the truth. That night, Sarah experienced what Elena later described as her dark night of the soul. Alone in her room at the facility, watching rain pound against the windows, she felt completely defeated. Her pregnant silhouette was reflected in the glass like a ghost of her former self, and she wondered if David had won completely. But as she sat there in the darkness, feeling her daughter move inside her, Sarah realized something important. She might have lost her husband, her best friend, her home, her money, and even her family's support, but she still had the most important thing, the child she was carrying and the determination to be the mother that child deserved. "I won't let them win," she whispered to her reflection in the rain-streaked window. "I won't let them steal our future." The next morning brought unexpected news that would change everything. Marcus arrived with Jennifer Walsh, David's first wife, and the story she had to tell would finally give Sarah the weapons she needed to fight back. But just as Sarah began to feel hope again, Elena received a call that made her face go pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked, recognizing the look of concern on her therapist's face. "David has convinced your parents that you're having a complete psychological breakdown. They've signed papers giving him temporary guardianship rights. He's petitioned the court to have you committed indefinitely." The revelation that her own parents had betrayed her was the final, devastating blow. As Sarah felt her world crumbling around her once again, she realized that David's manipulation had been even more extensive than she had imagined. The battle for her freedom and her child was about to become a war for her very survival. Jennifer Walsh looked remarkably similar to Sarah. Same height, same general build, even the same color hair. As she sat across from Sarah in the facility's conference room, the resemblance was so striking that Sarah felt like she was looking at a possible version of her future self. David has a type, Jennifer said wryly, noticing Sarah's stunned expression. Intelligent, successful women who can be convinced to give up their careers for love. Women who come from good families but don't have significant wealth of their own. Women who want to believe in fairy tale endings. Marcus had arranged this meeting after weeks of legal maneuvering. Jennifer had agreed to come forward with her story, despite the personal cost, because she couldn't stand to watch David destroy another woman the way he had destroyed her. It started exactly the same way, Jennifer continued. The whirlwind romance, the proposal that felt like something out of a movie, the pressure to quit my job because a woman like you shouldn't have to work. I was a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs, making excellent money, but David convinced me that being his wife was a better career. Sarah listened with growing amazement as Jennifer described a marriage that was almost identical to her own. The gradual isolation from friends and family, the control over finances disguised as protection and care. Even the way David had grown cold and distant in the final months of their marriage. But I never had an affair, Jennifer said. Or at least, not that I discovered. David's method with me was different. He convinced everyone I was mentally unstable because of an incident where I ended up in the emergency room after what I later realized was food poisoning, but which he claimed was a suicide attempt. Jennifer pulled out a thick folder of documents. It took me 5 years and every penny of my settlement to uncover the truth about what David did to me. But I finally have proof, documented evidence of his pattern of behavior, his financial manipulations, even testimony from some of his business associates who were uncomfortable with his methods. The documents Jennifer presented were devastating. Financial records showing how David had systematically hidden assets during their divorce. Medical records proving that Jennifer had never attempted suicide and that her emergency room visit was indeed due to food poisoning, possibly intentional. Most damaging of all were recorded conversations between David and his lawyers discussing strategies for discrediting Jennifer's testimony. The thing about David, Jennifer explained, is that he's incredibly intelligent but also incredibly arrogant. He assumes he's smarter than everyone else, so he doesn't always cover his tracks as carefully as he should. Marcus spread the documents across the table. Jennifer's evidence, combined with what we've discovered about the drugging scheme and the edited security footage, gives us a strong foundation for a counterattack. But we need to move quickly. David's petition to have you committed indefinitely is being heard next week. Sarah felt a mixture of hope and terror. What about my parents? How could they sign those papers without even talking to me? Jennifer's expression softened with sympathy. David is very good at manipulating older people, especially parents who want to believe their son-in-law is a good man. He probably convinced them that signing those papers was the only way to ensure you get the help you need. We can fight the guardianship petition, Marcus assured Sarah, especially now that we have evidence of David's pattern of behavior and the drugging scheme. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this could get much worse before it gets better. Elena had been quietly taking notes during the meeting. Now she looked up with a concerned expression. Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. Marcus received some information about Victoria that you should know about. Marcus opened another file. Victoria Sterling isn't who she claims to be. Her real name is Victoria Summers, and she has a history of targeting wealthy men in committed relationships. This isn't the first marriage she's helped destroy. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She's done this before. At least twice that we can prove, Marcus confirmed. There's a pattern. She befriends the wife, gains access to the marriage, then seduces the husband while simultaneously building a case against the wife's mental stability. In the previous cases, she disappeared once the divorce was finalized and she received her payoff. Sarah stared at the documents in disbelief. So she never loved David. This was all just a con. It appears that way, Jennifer said gently. though it's possible she's genuinely involved with David now. Sociopaths can form attachments, just not healthy ones. As the pieces of the conspiracy became clear, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief mixed with horror. Relief because it confirmed that she wasn't losing her mind. Everything she had suspected was true. Horror because the betrayal was even worse than she had imagined. "There's more," Marcus continued. "We've discovered that David has been hiding assets offshore for years. The financial forensics team estimates he's concealed at least $15 million in various accounts and shell companies." Elena leaned forward. "Sarah, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something important. You're not a victim anymore. You're a survivor who's about to become a warrior. We have the evidence to not only clear your name, but to expose David and Victoria for what they really are." That afternoon, Sarah participated in a group therapy session that Elena had arranged with other women who had survived similar experiences. The session was being held at the facility, but with women from Elena's private practice joining virtually. "The hardest part," shared a woman named Patricia, whose husband had been a prominent judge, "was accepting that the man I loved never really existed. The person I married was a character he was playing, designed to make me fall in love and become dependent on him." "What for me," added another woman, "it was realizing that I wasn't stupid or weak. These men are professionals at manipulation. They've had years to perfect their techniques, and they specifically target strong, intelligent women because we make better victims. We have more to lose." Sarah found strength in these women's stories, but she also began to understand the challenges ahead. Even with evidence of David's manipulation, she would still have to convince a legal system that was inherently biased toward wealthy, respectable men. That evening, as Sarah was preparing for bed, a nurse knocked on her door with an urgent message. "Mrs. Mitchell, you have an emergency phone call. It's your sister." Sarah's heart raced as she took the phone. Jennifer rarely called the facility, and never at night. "Sarah." Jennifer's voice was shaky and frightened. "I need to tell you something. David came to see Mom and Dad tonight, and I overheard part of their conversation." "Hey, what did he say?" "He was talking about the custody hearing next week. Sarah, he's not planning to fight for custody because he wants Emma. He's doing it because he wants to make sure Victoria's baby is his only legal heir. If he can prove you're unfit and terminate your parental rights, then Victoria's child becomes his sole beneficiary." The revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. "So this isn't about wanting to be a father to Emma." "No, Sarah. It's about money and control, just like everything else with David. He wants to eliminate any financial claims Emma might have on his estate." After hanging up, Sarah lay awake most of the night processing this new information. David wasn't just trying to steal her life. He was trying to steal her daughter's future as well. The next morning brought more devastating news. Elena arrived with a grim expression and a stack of newspapers. "The story has broken," Elena announced. "David's social media campaign backfired. A journalist investigated the viral video and discovered it had been edited. The full story is now front-page news in the Los Angeles Times." Sarah read the headline with amazement. "Tech millionaire accused of systematic abuse. Wife claims elaborate frame-up." The article detailed the drugging scheme, the edited security footage, and Victoria's history of targeting wealthy married men. "This is good news, right?" Sarah asked hopefully. Elena's expression remained serious. "It's complicated. The publicity helps validate your claims, but it also means David will become more desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things." As if summoned by Elena's words, Marcus burst into the room with his phone pressed to his ear. "We need to get you out of this facility immediately," he said urgently. "David has filed new papers claiming that the media attention is causing you additional psychological distress. He's convinced a judge to order your immediate transfer to a more secure facility, essentially a psychiatric prison." Sarah felt her world tilting again. "Can he do that?" "He's doing it," Marcus replied grimly. "The transfer order is effective immediately. But we have one chance. There's a window of about 2 hours before the transport arrives. If we can get you discharged and into protective custody during that time, we can fight the transfer order. Elena was already gathering Sarah's belongings. There's a safe house we use for women in extreme danger. You'll be protected there while Marcus fights the legal battles. As they prepared for Sarah's escape from the facility, she realized that the war for her freedom was entering its most dangerous phase. David was no longer playing games. He was fighting for his survival just as much as she was fighting for hers. But for the first time since her nightmare began, Sarah felt like she had real allies and real weapons in the fight. The truth was finally coming to light, and she was no longer facing this battle alone. The question was whether they could move fast enough to stay ahead of David's increasingly desperate attempts to destroy her completely. As Sarah prepared to leave the facility that had been both her prison and her sanctuary, she felt her daughter kick strongly inside her belly, a reminder that this fight was about more than just her own survival. It was about securing a future for both of them, free from the shadow of David's manipulation and control. The real battle was just beginning. The safe house was a modest two-story home in a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, far removed from the luxury Sarah had grown accustomed to during her marriage. But as she settled into the small bedroom on the second floor, she felt safer than she had in months. For the first time since discovering David's betrayal, she could sleep without worrying about being drugged, monitored, or manipulated. Marcus had managed to get the psychiatric transfer order temporarily suspended, but the legal victory came at a cost. David's lawyers were now claiming that Sarah's escape from the facility proved she was a flight risk and potentially dangerous to her unborn child. He's painting you as an unstable woman who's being manipulated by unscrupulous lawyers and therapists, Marcus explained during one of their strategy sessions. His narrative is that everyone around you is taking advantage of your mental illness for their own gain. Elena continued providing therapy sessions at the safe house, helping Sarah process the trauma while preparing for the custody battle ahead. Jennifer Walsh had become an unexpected ally, sharing her own experiences and helping Marcus build a comprehensive case against David's pattern of abuse. The media attention surrounding the case had created a polarized public response. Sarah had received hundreds of supportive messages from women who had experienced similar abuse, but she had also been targeted by online trolls who believed David's version of events. The good news, Elena observed, is that you're not isolated anymore. David's power came from making you feel like you were alone and crazy. Now you have supporters, evidence, and legal representation. The playing field is becoming more level. 3 weeks into her stay at the safe house, Sarah began experiencing regular contractions. At first, she assumed it was false labor. Her stress levels were still elevated despite feeling safer. But as the contractions grew stronger and more frequent, Elena insisted they head to the hospital. "I'm not due for another month," Sarah protested as another wave of pain hit her. "Stress-induced early labor is very common in situations like yours," Elena replied calmly. "The important thing is getting you and the baby proper medical care." The drive to Cedars-Sinai took place during a violent thunderstorm, with rain lashing the windshield and lightning illuminating the night sky. Sarah couldn't help but see it as symbolic. Her new life was about to be born in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Dr. Jennifer Patel was waiting for them in the maternity ward. She had been following Sarah's case through the media and had volunteered to be her attending physician. "Mrs. Mitchell," Dr. Patel said as they prepared Sarah for delivery, "I want you to know that several of us on staff have been concerned about the way you were treated during your previous hospital stays. Tonight, you're going to receive the care and respect you deserve." As Sarah's labor progressed through the night, she was surrounded by people who believed in her and supported her fight for freedom. Elena held her hand during contractions. Marcus stayed in the waiting room, ready to handle any legal issues that might arise. Jennifer Walsh had driven through the storm to be there, understanding better than anyone what this moment meant. The one person notably absent was David. Marcus had been legally required to notify David about Sarah's labor, but hours passed without any response. Even Victoria, who had played the role of caring friend for so long, was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Sarah asked during a brief break between contractions. "Shouldn't he want to be here for his daughter's birth?" Elena squeezed Sarah's hand. His absence tonight tells you everything you need to know about his priorities. This isn't about being a father to Emma. It's about control and money. At 3:47 a.m., during the height of the thunderstorm, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Emma Rose Mitchell came into the world with a powerful cry that seemed to announce her determination to fight for her place in it. As Sarah held her daughter for the first time, she felt a strength she had never known before. This tiny, perfect human being was depending on her completely, and Sarah knew she would do whatever it took to protect Emma from the toxic legacy of her father's manipulation. "She's beautiful," Elena whispered, tears in her eyes. "Look at that determined little face. She's going to be a fighter, just like her mother." Dr. Patel completed the delivery and newborn assessments while the storm continued to rage outside. "Both mother and baby are healthy," she announced. "Emma is small but strong, about 5 pounds, which is excellent for 36 weeks. It wasn't until the next morning that David finally appeared at the hospital. Sarah was nursing Emma when he walked into her room, followed by Victoria and his lawyer, Mr. Blackstone. David looked every inch the concerned father, expensive suit, worried expression, flowers in hand. But Sarah could see the cold calculation in his eyes as he surveyed the scene. "Sarah," he said in a voice that managed to sound both caring and patronizing, "I came as soon as I could. How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, David. We're both fine." Sarah's voice was steady and strong. "No thanks to you." Victoria stepped forward, playing her familiar role of the concerned friend. "Sarah, honey, you look wonderful. May I see the baby?" "No," Sarah replied firmly. "You may not." David's mask slipped slightly. "Sarah, I know we've had our differences, but Emma's my daughter too. I have rights." Marcus appeared in the doorway, having been alerted by hospital security about David's arrival. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to remind you that there are court orders in place regarding contact with my client. Any interaction needs to be supervised and documented." Mr. Blackstone stepped forward with his usual smooth efficiency. "We're here simply to verify the child's birth and health status. Mr. Mitchell has legitimate paternal interests that need to be protected." Dr. Patel entered the room, her professional demeanor making it clear she was not impressed by the delegation. "I need all non-family members to leave the room immediately. Mrs. Mitchell needs rest, and the baby needs a calm environment." "I am family," David insisted. "I'm the father. You're also the subject of multiple abuse allegations." Dr. Patel replied coldly. "Hospital policy requires supervised visitation for anyone accused of domestic violence." David's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. I'm being treated like a criminal because my wife had a psychological breakdown and started making wild accusations." Sarah looked up from nursing Emma, her voice calm but filled with steel. "The only breakdown here is the breakdown of your lies. David, everyone knows the truth now." Victoria moved closer to the bed, her facade of concern finally dropping completely. "Sarah, you need to think about what's best for Emma. David can provide for her in ways you never could. Don't let your pride hurt your daughter's future." "I am thinking about what's best for Emma," Sarah replied. "That's why I'm making sure she grows up knowing the difference between love and manipulation." The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of a social services worker, accompanied by 2 police officers. Marcus had anticipated this moment and prepared accordingly. "Mrs. Mitchell," the social worker said, "I'm Jane Morrison from Child Protective Services. We've received reports of concern about the baby's welfare, and we need to conduct an assessment." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat, but Elena, who had been quietly observing from the corner, stepped forward. "Ms. Morrison, I'm Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Mrs. Mitchell's therapist. I have comprehensive documentation of Mrs. Mitchell's mental health status and her fitness as a mother. I think you'll find that the reports you received are based on false information provided by individuals with ulterior motives." Marcus presented a folder to the social worker. "We prepared a complete dossier of evidence showing that Mrs. Mitchell has been the victim of systematic abuse designed to make her appear mentally unstable. This includes proof of drugging, financial manipulation, and witness testimony from other victims of the same perpetrator. As the social worker reviewed the evidence, David became increasingly agitated. This is all fabricated. Sarah is manipulating everyone around her, just like she tried to manipulate me. One of the police officers stepped forward. Sir, I need you to lower your voice. This is a hospital, and there are other patients trying to rest. Victoria tried a different approach, moving closer to Sarah with tears in her eyes. Sarah, please, think about Emma. David loves her so much already. He just wants to be a good father. Sarah looked at her former best friend with something approaching pity. Victoria, I know who you really are now. I know about the other marriages you've helped destroy. The only person you love is yourself. The social worker finished reviewing Marcus's documentation and looked up with a professional but sympathetic expression. Mrs. Mitchell, based on the evidence presented and my observations today, I see no reason for CPS intervention at this time. You appear to be a loving, competent mother, and your support system seems strong. David's face turned red with rage. This is a conspiracy. Everyone is being manipulated by a mentally ill woman and her unethical lawyers. Dr. Patel had heard enough. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Your behavior is disruptive and potentially harmful to my patient and her newborn. As hospital security escorted David and Victoria from the room, Sarah felt Emma stir in her arms. Her daughter's eyes opened briefly, dark and alert, as if she were taking in the situation and making her own assessment of the world she had been born into. She's already stronger than both of them, Elena observed, watching Emma's focused gaze. Look at that determination. She knows she's got a warrior for a mother. That evening, as the storm finally cleared and the first stars appeared in the sky, Sarah sat by the hospital window holding Emma and planning their future. For the first time in months, the future felt possible rather than terrifying. Marcus had already filed new motions based on David's behavior at the hospital, and the media coverage of his outburst was painting him in an increasingly negative light. The tide was finally turning in Sarah's favor. But as Sarah dozed in the hospital bed with Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, she didn't know that across town, David was meeting with Victoria and his lawyers to plan their most desperate gambit yet. The private investigator Marcus had hired called him at midnight with news that changed everything. David Mitchell has been hiding more than assets, the investigator reported. He's been hiding multiple identities. We found evidence that he may be involved in marriage fraud schemes in at least 3 other states. The revelation meant that Sarah's battle was about to become part of a much larger investigation, one that could finally bring David's empire of lies crashing down. But it also meant that David, facing the possibility of federal charges, was about to become more dangerous than ever. The financial forensics team that Marcus had hired worked with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, and their discoveries about David's hidden assets were staggering even to Sarah, who thought she understood the scope of his deception. $15 million, Marcus announced during a meeting at the safe house, spreading documents across the kitchen table. That's what we found so far in offshore accounts, shell companies, and hidden investments. And we're not done digging. Emma slept peacefully in Sarah's arms as she reviewed the evidence of her husband's massive financial fraud. Properties in the Cayman Islands purchased under fake names. Swiss bank accounts opened with forged documents. An entire network of businesses that existed only on paper, but had been used to hide millions of dollars in assets. Jennifer Walsh, who had been working closely with Marcus's team, shook her head in amazement. This makes what he did to me look like small-time theft. Sarah, he's been planning this for years, maybe since before he even married you. Elena was taking notes, her expression grim. This level of financial deception suggests antisocial personality disorder. David isn't just a manipulative husband. He's a criminal who sees other people as resources to be exploited. But the most shocking discovery came when Marcus's private investigator, a former FBI agent named Tom Rodriguez, presented his findings about Victoria. Victoria Summers, which is her real name, has been operating this scheme in multiple states. Tom reported, she targets wealthy married men, befriends their wives, then helps orchestrate divorces that leave the wives with nothing while she and her partners pocket millions. Tom pulled out a thick file containing photographs and documents. She's done this at least 6 times that we can prove. The pattern is always the same. Befriend the wife, seduce the husband, help him hide assets, then disappear once the divorce is finalized with her share of the money. Sarah stared at the photographs of Victoria with different men in different cities, always playing the same role of the sympathetic friend turned devoted mistress. So she never cared about David either. This was all just business. That's where it gets interesting. Tom continued, with David, something changed. Our surveillance suggests she's genuinely pregnant and believes David is going to marry her and make her his permanent partner. She doesn't realize that she's about to become his next victim. Marcus leaned forward with interest. What do you mean? David has been setting up Victoria to take the fall for the entire operation. Documents we found suggest he's been creating evidence that makes her look like the mastermind while positioning himself as another victim. When this all comes crashing down, Victoria is going to find herself facing federal charges while David walks away with a new identity and a Swiss bank account. The revelation that Victoria was also being manipulated by David created an unexpected opportunity. Elena suggested that they might be able to turn Victoria against David if she could be made to understand that she was next on his list of victims. Sociopaths like Victoria can form alliances when it serves their interests, Elena explained. If she realizes David is planning to destroy her, she might be willing to provide evidence against him to save herself. Sarah found the idea of working with Victoria repugnant, but she was learning to think strategically rather than emotionally. What would we offer her? Immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony. Marcus replied, she has inside knowledge of David's operation that could put him away for decades. While Marcus's team continued their investigation, Sarah focused on adapting to life as a new mother while living in hiding. Emma was thriving, but the stress of their situation was taking its toll on Sarah's recovery from childbirth. Elena had arranged for a pediatric nurse to visit the safe house regularly, and Dr. Patel made house calls to monitor both Sarah and Emma's health. The support network that had formed around them was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her marriage. These people cared about her well-being without expecting anything in return. This is what healthy relationships look like, Elena observed during one of their therapy sessions. People who support you because they value you as a person, not because they want to control or use you. The breakthrough in their case came from an unexpected source. Victoria herself called Marcus's office, claiming she needed to speak with Sarah urgently. She sounds scared, Marcus reported. Our surveillance team says David has been meeting with some very unsavory characters, the kind of people who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. Elena and Marcus debated whether it was safe for Sarah to meet with Victoria, but Sarah made the decision herself. If Victoria has information that can protect Emma's future, I need to hear it, Sarah declared. I won't let fear make decisions for us anymore. The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a family restaurant in a busy shopping center where they would be surrounded by witnesses. Marcus and Elena accompanied Sarah, while Emma stayed at the safe house with Jennifer Walsh. Victoria looked nothing like the polished woman who had betrayed Sarah months earlier. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her usually perfect hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could conceal. Sarah, Victoria said, her voice shaking as she slid into the booth across from them. I need your help. My help? Sarah couldn't keep the incredulity out of her voice. After everything you've done to me. You don't understand, Victoria continued desperately. David is planning to kill me. He's already started moving money and setting up new identities. Once the baby is born, I'm going to disappear just like his other partners. Marcus leaned forward. What other partners? Victoria pulled out a manila envelope with trembling hands. There have been others before me. women who helped him with his schemes and then vanished when they became liabilities. I found their identification documents in David's safe, driver's licenses, passports, credit cards, all belonging to women who are supposed to be missing. The photographs Victoria produced were chilling. 3 different women, all roughly the same physical type as Victoria and Sarah, all smiling in what appeared to be driver's license photos. According to the documents, all 3 had simply disappeared over the past 5 years. David doesn't just discard his partners, Victoria whispered. He eliminates them. Elena studied Victoria's demeanor carefully. Why should we believe you now? You've lied about everything else. Because I'm carrying his child, and I just realized that makes me expendable, not valuable, Victoria replied. He's done this before, convinced women to get pregnant thinking it would secure their position, then eliminated them before the children could be born to claim inheritance rights. Sarah felt sick as she processed the implications. Are you saying David is a serial killer? I'm saying David is a man who views other people as obstacles to be removed when they're no longer useful, Victoria answered. And right now, both you and I are obstacles. Marcus took careful notes as Victoria provided details about David's operation. Bank account numbers, passwords, the names of his associates, even the location of additional evidence hidden in various properties. There's something else, Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. David has been planning something for Emma's first birthday. He calls it his final solution to the custody problem. Sarah, I think he's planning to eliminate both of you. The meeting ended with Victoria agreeing to cooperate fully with the investigation in exchange for protection and immunity. As they prepared to leave, she grabbed Sarah's arm. I know you have no reason to forgive me, Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. But I need you to know that when I started this, I thought David was just another wealthy man looking to upgrade his wife. I didn't know I was helping a monster. That evening, as Sarah held Emma and watched the sunset from the safe house window, she reflected on how completely her understanding of her situation had changed. What had started as a simple case of adultery and divorce had evolved into something resembling a criminal conspiracy that spanned multiple states and potentially involved multiple murders. Marcus was working with federal authorities to build a comprehensive case against David's entire operation. The evidence Victoria had provided, combined with what the forensics team had discovered, painted a picture of a man who had been running sophisticated criminal enterprises for years. We're not just fighting for custody anymore, Marcus explained. We're trying to bring down what appears to be a multi-million-dollar criminal organization. Emma stirred in Sarah's arms, making the soft sounds that newborns make when they're dreaming. Sarah wondered what kind of world she had brought her daughter into, but she also felt a fierce determination to make sure Emma grew up free from the shadow of her father's crimes. The next morning brought news that changed everything once again. Tom Rodriguez called with an urgent update from his surveillance team. David knows Victoria talked to you, Tom reported. He's accelerating his timeline. Our sources suggest he's planning to leave the country within 48 hours. What about Emma? Sarah asked, her blood running cold. He's not leaving without her, Marcus replied grimly. Sarah, we need to get you and Emma into federal protection immediately. As they prepared to transfer to a more secure location, Sarah realized that her fight for freedom had become a race against time. David's desperation was making him increasingly dangerous, and the stakes had never been higher. But for the first time since her nightmare began, Sarah felt like she was fighting from a position of strength rather than weakness. She had allies, evidence, and most importantly, she had the absolute determination to protect her daughter from a man who saw children as nothing more than assets to be controlled or obstacles to be eliminated. The final battle was about to begin, and Sarah was ready to win it at any cost. The federal safe house was a nondescript apartment complex in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of place where FBI agents housed witnesses and protected parties during high-profile cases. Sarah found herself in a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor, with federal marshals stationed discreetly throughout the building. Emma was now 6 weeks old and thriving, despite the chaos surrounding her birth. She had developed a schedule that allowed Sarah some much-needed rest, and her bright, alert eyes seemed to take in everything around her with remarkable focus. "She's going to remember all of this somehow," Elena observed during one of their sessions. "Children absorb more than we realize, even as infants. But Emma's going to grow up knowing that her mother fought for her, and that knowledge will make her strong." Marcus had been working around the clock with federal prosecutors to build their case against David. The evidence was overwhelming, but David's wealth and connections meant that he had access to the best defense attorneys money could buy. He's claiming that he's the victim of an elaborate frame-up orchestrated by his mentally ill wife and her unethical legal team. Marcus reported, "His lawyers are arguing that Victoria is a criminal who manipulated both David and Sarah for her own gain." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah that David was now using a version of the truth as his defense strategy. Victoria had indeed been manipulating everyone around her. The difference was that David had been her partner, not her victim. Victoria's cooperation with federal authorities had been invaluable, but her credibility as a witness was questionable given her history of deception. The prosecution's case would ultimately depend on the documentary evidence rather than witness testimony. Jennifer Walsh had become an unexpected source of strength for Sarah during this period. As David's first wife, she understood better than anyone the psychological toll of fighting such a sophisticated manipulator. "The hardest part for me was accepting that I hadn't been crazy or weak," Jennifer shared during one of their conversations. "David is a professional at making intelligent women doubt their own sanity. The fact that you recognized what was happening and fought back shows incredible strength." Sarah was learning to see herself differently, not as a victim who had been naive enough to be deceived, but as a survivor who had escaped a dangerous situation and protected her child in the process. The legal battle intensified when David's team made what appeared to be a generous settlement offer. He would give Sarah half of his legitimate assets, maintain her in a lifestyle similar to what she had enjoyed during their marriage, and allow her primary custody of Emma in exchange for her agreement to drop all criminal charges and refrain from further media interviews. "It's a trap," Marcus warned immediately. "If you accept this settlement, it prevents federal prosecutors from using your testimony in their criminal case. David walks away from potential murder charges, and other women remain at risk." Sarah's decision was made easier by what the settlement offer revealed about David's priorities. He wasn't offering shared custody or regular visitation with Emma. He was essentially buying his way out of fatherhood while protecting himself from criminal prosecution. He doesn't want to be Emma's father, Sarah realized. He just wanted to control whether I could be her mother. Now that Victoria is having his heir, Emma represents a financial liability rather than an asset. Elena helped Sarah understand that David's offer was actually a sign of weakness rather than strength. He's offering this settlement because he knows the evidence against him is overwhelming. This is his attempt to limit the damage and escape consequences. Sarah's response to the settlement offer was delivered through Marcus in a formal legal document, but the essence was simple. "I will not be bought, and I will not be silenced. My daughter deserves a father who is not a criminal, and other women deserve protection from this predator." The rejection of David's settlement offer marked a turning point in their relationship dynamic. For the first time since their marriage began, Sarah held the power position. She had evidence, allies, legal protection, and public support. David was the one scrambling to avoid consequences. The media coverage of the case had evolved from sensational gossip about a wealthy couple's divorce to serious investigative reporting about marriage fraud and potential homicide. Sarah had been contacted by journalists from major networks who wanted to tell her story, and several of them were working on broader investigations into financial abuse in high-net-worth marriages. "You've become a symbol," Elena observed. "Women all over the country are seeing your story and recognizing elements of their own experiences. You're helping others find the courage to speak up about abuse they've been hiding." The support from other women had been overwhelming. Sarah received hundreds of letters and emails from women who had experienced similar manipulation and control. Many of them had never told anyone about their experiences until they saw Sarah's story in the media. One letter particularly moved Sarah. It was from a woman in Texas whose tech executive husband had used tactics nearly identical to David's: financial control, social isolation, and systematic gaslighting designed to make her question her own sanity. "Reading your story saved my life," the woman wrote. "I had been planning to kill myself because I thought I was losing my mind. Now I understand that I'm not crazy. I'm being abused. I'm leaving him today." Sarah realized that fighting David publicly, rather than accepting a quiet settlement, had consequences far beyond her own situation. Her case was exposing patterns of abuse that had been hidden in wealthy communities for decades. The federal investigation had also expanded beyond David's individual crimes. Prosecutors were looking into what appeared to be a network of professionals who specialized in helping wealthy men hide assets and destroy their wives' credibility during divorces. Victoria's pregnancy had become a complicating factor in the case. She was now 7 months pregnant with David's child, but living in federal protection and cooperating with prosecutors. The question of what would happen to her baby after David's arrest created additional legal complexities. "Victoria made terrible choices," Elena acknowledged, "but the child she's carrying is innocent. That baby deserves protection from David just as much as Emma does." As the federal case against David moved toward trial, Sarah was finally able to begin planning a future for herself and Emma that didn't revolve around surviving David's attacks. She had started looking at apartments where they could live after the trial, and she was exploring opportunities to return to work in marketing. Marcus had also become more than just her attorney. Their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. He was one of the few men Sarah had ever met who seemed to genuinely support female empowerment without expecting anything in return. "I want you to know," Sarah told him during one of their strategy sessions, "that you saved our lives. If you hadn't taken my case, Emma and I would probably be dead by now." Marcus's response surprised her. "Sarah, I didn't save you. You saved yourself. You're the one who escaped, who fought back, who refused to be silenced. I just provided legal support for decisions you had already made." The preliminary hearing for David's criminal trial was scheduled for the following month. Sarah would testify about her experiences, but the case would ultimately be decided based on documentary evidence and Victoria's insider testimony about David's criminal organization. 3 days before the hearing, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything once again. David wanted to meet with her privately to discuss what he called a mutually beneficial arrangement. "It's obviously another trap," Marcus warned. "He's facing life in prison. He has nothing to lose and everything to gain by trying one final manipulation." But Sarah surprised everyone by agreeing to the meeting. "I want to look him in the eye one more time. I want him to see what he created when he tried to destroy me." The meeting was arranged in a federal courthouse conference room, with U.S. Marshals present and everything being recorded. David entered wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide how much he had aged over the past few months. His hair was graying, his face was drawn, and his eyes held a desperate quality Sarah had never seen before. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from her at the polished conference table, "I know you think I'm a monster, but everything I did was because I loved you." Sarah studied her husband's face and realized she felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no fear. "David, you don't know what love is. You only know possession and control." "I can give you everything you've ever wanted," David continued desperately. "More money than you could spend in a lifetime. Houses anywhere in the world. The best education for Emma. All you have to do is tell the prosecutors that you misunderstood what happened between us." Sarah smiled, and the expression seemed to unnerve David more than anger would have. "What I want is for my daughter to grow up free from your influence. What I want is for other women to be safe from predators like you. What I want is justice. David, and that's something your money can't buy." David's composure finally cracked completely. "You stupid woman! Do you have any idea what you've done? I made you, I gave you a life you never could have achieved on your own, and this is how you repay me." "You didn't make me, David. You tried to break me. But I'm still here. I'm still fighting, and I'm going to win." As federal marshals escorted David from the room, Sarah felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The man she had married was gone, if he had ever really existed at all. What remained was a criminal facing justice for his crimes. That evening, as Sarah fed Emma and watched the sunset from their federal safe house window, she reflected on how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been trapped in a golden cage, isolated and controlled by a man who saw her as a possession. Now she was free, empowered, and preparing to rebuild her life on her own terms. Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had fought for their freedom and won. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Elena with news that would complete Sarah's transformation from victim to victor. "Sarah," Elena said excitedly, "I just heard from Marcus. David's plea negotiations fell through. He's going to trial, and the prosecutors are confident they can get a conviction. It's over. Sarah, you won." As Sarah hung up the phone and looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, she realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of her destroyed marriage, and she was ready to soar. 6 months after David's conviction on multiple federal charges, including marriage fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder, Sarah stood in the kitchen of her new apartment in Santa Monica, preparing Emma's morning bottle while news of David's sentencing played on the television. Tech millionaire David Mitchell was sentenced today to 25 years in federal prison, the news anchor reported. Mitchell was convicted of operating a multi-state criminal enterprise that defrauded multiple women of millions of dollars and may have been connected to the disappearances of at least 3 women over the past 5 years. Sarah turned off the television and focused on Emma, who was now 10 months old and beginning to show signs of walking. Her daughter had David's dark hair, but Sarah's determined spirit, and she was developing into a remarkably independent and strong-willed child. The apartment was modest compared to the Malibu mansion Sarah had shared with David, but it was truly hers. She had furnished it with pieces she loved rather than designer items chosen to impress others. The walls were covered with photographs of Emma and artwork Sarah had created during her therapy sessions with Elena. Sarah had returned to work part-time as a marketing consultant, specializing in helping women-owned businesses develop their brand strategies. The work was fulfilling in ways her marriage never had been, and she was building a client base of entrepreneurs who shared her values of authenticity and empowerment. Victoria had given birth to a son 3 months earlier. After David's conviction, she had entered witness protection and relocated to another state where she was raising David Jr. under a new identity. She had sent Sarah a letter apologizing for her role in the conspiracy, but Sarah had chosen not to respond. Some betrayals were too deep for forgiveness. Even when the betrayer had ultimately helped bring David to justice, Jennifer Walsh had become a close friend and surrogate aunt to Emma. She had used her experience with David to start a nonprofit organization that helped women escape financially abusive marriages, and Sarah served on the board of directors. Marcus Chen had also become much more than Sarah's attorney. Their professional relationship had evolved into a deep friendship and, eventually, romantic involvement. He was patient with Sarah's trust issues and supportive of her need to maintain her independence. "I never want to be financially dependent on a man again," Sarah had told him during one of their early conversations about their relationship. "I would never want you to be," Marcus had replied. "Your strength and independence are part of what I love about you." Elena continued to provide therapy sessions, though they had evolved from crisis intervention to ongoing personal development. Sarah was working on writing a book about her experiences, hoping to help other women recognize and escape similar situations. "You've transformed from a victim to a survivor to a thriver," Elena observed during one of their recent sessions. "Most importantly, you've maintained your capacity for love and trust despite everything David put you through." The book project had connected Sarah with other women who had survived similar experiences. They had formed an informal support network that met monthly, sharing stories and strategies for rebuilding their lives after escaping abusive marriages. On this particular morning, as Sarah prepared to take Emma to the park, her phone rang with a call that would change everything once again. "Mrs. Mitchell." The voice belonged to FBI agent Patricia Reynolds, who had worked on David's case. "I need to speak with you about some new developments. Can you meet me this afternoon?" Sarah's blood ran cold. Is David trying to appeal his conviction? No, ma'am, this is about something else entirely, something that affects you and Emma directly. The meeting took place at the FBI's Los Angeles field office, in the same building where Sarah had provided testimony against David months earlier. Agent Reynolds was accompanied by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Mrs. Mitchell, Agent Reynolds began, this is Agent Sarah Hoffman from our International Crimes Division. She has some information about your husband that you need to hear. Agent Hoffman opened a thick file and pulled out several photographs. Mrs. Mitchell, we've discovered that David Mitchell maintained active identities in at least 3 other countries. He has been married to women in Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and Australia simultaneously. Sarah stared at the photographs in disbelief. They showed David at various wedding ceremonies, looking exactly as he had when he married her, but standing beside different women who all bore a striking resemblance to Sarah herself. Are you telling me that David was already married when he married me? We're telling you that David Mitchell is a serial bigamist who has been running marriage fraud schemes internationally for over a decade. Agent Hoffman replied, what happened to you wasn't an isolated incident. It was his standard operating procedure. The revelation that her marriage to David had been legally invalid was initially shocking, but as Sarah processed the information, she realized it was actually liberating. She had never been truly married to David at all. She had been the victim of an elaborate con game. There's more, Agent Reynolds continued. The 3 women in these photographs have all gone missing over the past 5 years. We believe David may have killed them when they became liabilities to his operation. Sarah felt sick as she understood the implications. If I hadn't fought back, if I hadn't exposed him, you would likely have disappeared as well, Agent Hoffman confirmed. Your decision to fight publicly rather than accept a quiet settlement probably saved your life. The international investigation into David's crimes was ongoing, with authorities in multiple countries working to identify additional victims and locate the missing women. Sarah's testimony would be crucial to building cases in other jurisdictions. We need you to know that this investigation could take years to complete, Agent Reynolds warned. David's criminal network was extensive, and we're still discovering the full scope of his operations. As Sarah left the FBI building, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you'll be very happy. A friend. Sarah showed the message to Marcus when she picked Emma up from his office, where he had been babysitting while she met with the FBI. It's probably just spam, Marcus said, but his expression suggested he was concerned. That evening, at what was supposed to be their private engagement celebration at a small restaurant in Beverly Hills, Sarah's phone rang with a call from Jennifer Walsh. Sarah, Jennifer's voice was urgent. There's something on the news you need to see. Turn on Channel 7. The breaking news report showed footage of David being escorted from his federal prison by U.S. Marshals. The reporter explained that David Mitchell had been temporarily released into federal custody for transport to Switzerland, where he was wanted on additional charges related to the disappearance of his Swiss wife. During the prisoner transport, Mitchell overpowered 2 federal agents and escaped. The reporter continued, he is considered extremely dangerous and should not be approached by civilians. Anyone with information about his whereabouts should contact federal authorities immediately. Sarah felt her world tilting as she realized that David was free and potentially heading toward her location. Marcus immediately called FBI agent Reynolds while Sarah tried to process the implications of David's escape. We need to get you and Emma into protective custody immediately, Agent Reynolds told Sarah over the phone. David has demonstrated that he's willing to kill to protect his secrets. With everything you know about his operation, you're his biggest threat. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Sarah noticed that Emma's diaper bag was missing from their table. A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized what had happened. Marcus, she whispered, Emma's not in her car seat. They rushed outside to find Sarah's car empty, with no sign of Emma or her diaper bag. On the windshield was a note written in David's distinctive handwriting. If you want to see Emma again, come alone to the place where it all began. You have 2 hours. Sarah knew exactly what David meant. Their former home in Malibu, the scene of her discovery of his affair, and the beginning of her nightmare. As FBI agents swarmed the restaurant and began coordinating Emma's rescue, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm going to meet him," she announced. "Absolutely not," Marcus protested. "Sarah, he's going to kill you." "Maybe," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her terror. "But he's not going to hurt Emma. She's his daughter. And even David has some boundaries." Agent Reynolds tried to dissuade her. "Mrs. Mitchell, we can't guarantee your safety if you go there alone." Sarah looked at the assembled law enforcement officers and realized that this moment had been inevitable since the day she first discovered David's betrayal. Their conflict had always been about power and control, and it would only end when one of them was completely defeated. "This is my fight," Sarah said firmly. "David took everything from me once before, and I rebuilt my life. If he wants to finish this, then let's finish it." As Sarah drove toward Malibu in a car equipped with tracking devices and recording equipment, she thought about the woman she had been when she first lived in that house. Naive, trusting, dependent on a man who saw her as a possession to be controlled. The woman driving toward that confrontation was completely different. Strong, independent, and absolutely determined to protect her daughter at any cost. David was waiting for her in the same bedroom where she had discovered his affair with Victoria almost 2 years earlier. He was holding Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in his arms, apparently unharmed. "Hello, Sarah," David said, his voice carrying the same charm that had once made her fall in love with him. "You look well. Motherhood suits you." "Give me my daughter, David." "Our daughter," David corrected. "I may be a lot of things, Sarah, but I'm still Emma's father." Sarah studied David's face and realized that prison had changed him. He looked older, harder, and there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. A kind of desperate madness that made him even more dangerous. "What do you want, David?" "I want what I've always wanted. For us to be a family. You, me, and Emma. We can disappear together. Start over somewhere new. I have money hidden all over the world. Sarah, we can live like royalty anywhere we choose." "You're talking about kidnapping Emma and forcing me to go with you." "I'm talking about giving us a second chance," David replied. "You're the only woman who ever truly understood me, Sarah. Even when you were fighting me, I could see that you knew who I really was." Sarah realized that David's escape from prison hadn't been motivated by a desire for freedom. It had been motivated by an obsession with reclaiming control over her and Emma. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Sarah said, moving slowly closer to him. "I'm not the woman you married. I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not going anywhere with you." David's expression shifted, and Sarah saw the cold calculation return to his eyes. "Then you're going to watch me disappear with Emma, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that you chose your pride over your daughter's safety." "No, David, I'm going to watch federal agents arrest you for the final time, and Emma is going to grow up knowing that her mother protected her from a monster." As if summoned by Sarah's words, FBI agents burst through the doors and windows of the bedroom, surrounding David before he could react. He was still holding Emma, but she remained calm and quiet, as if she sensed that she was safe despite the chaos around her. "David Mitchell, you're under arrest," Agent Reynolds announced. "Put the child down and step away." David looked around at the assembled agents, then back at Sarah. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the man she had once loved, confused, defeated, and perhaps even remorseful. "I really did love you, Sarah," he said quietly as he gently placed Emma in her arms. "That was never a lie." "I know," Sarah replied. "But love without respect isn't love at all, David. It's just possession." As federal agents led David away in handcuffs, Sarah held Emma close and walked out of the house that had been both her dream home and her prison for the final time. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the altar of a small chapel in Santa Barbara, wearing a simple white dress and holding Emma, who was now walking and beginning to say her first words. Marcus was waiting for her at the altar. his expression filled with the kind of love and respect Sarah had never thought possible. Elena served as maid of honor, and Jennifer Walsh was there with several of the women from their support group. The ceremony was small, intimate, and focused on celebrating love that was based on equality and mutual respect rather than control and possession. As Sarah and Marcus exchanged vows that they had written together, Emma clapped her hands and laughed, as if she understood that this was a celebration of the family they had chosen to create together. The reception was held in Elena's backyard, with string lights and simple decorations that Sarah had chosen herself. It was everything her wedding to David hadn't been: authentic, joyful, and surrounded by people who truly cared about her happiness. As the evening wound down and Sarah danced with Marcus while Emma slept in Jennifer's arms, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything: her marriage, her home, her money, even her family's support. But in rebuilding her life from nothing, she had discovered who she really was and what she was truly capable of. David was serving multiple life sentences in a maximum security federal prison, with no possibility of parole. The international investigation had led to the conviction of dozens of his associates and the rescue of several women who had been trapped in similar situations. Victoria had successfully disappeared into witness protection and was reportedly doing well raising her son far from the influence of his father's crimes. Sarah's book about her experiences had become a bestseller, and she had used the proceeds to establish a foundation that helped women escape financial abuse. She received letters every day from women who had found the courage to leave dangerous situations after reading her story. But perhaps most importantly, Emma was growing up in an environment filled with love, respect, and honesty. She would never know a world where women were expected to sacrifice their identity for male approval, and she would never doubt that she was valued for who she was rather than what she could provide to others. As Sarah and Marcus prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Hawaii, Emma's first airplane trip, Sarah received one final surprise. Agent Reynolds called with news about the international investigation. Mrs. Mitchell, Mrs. Chen, we've located the 3 missing women from David's overseas operations. They're all alive. The women had been held captive in a compound in Eastern Europe, but they had been rescued during a coordinated international law enforcement operation. They were receiving medical and psychological care and would eventually testify against David's remaining associates. They wanted me to tell you something, Agent Reynolds continued. They said that your courage in fighting back publicly gave them hope during their captivity. They said you proved that David could be defeated. As Sarah hung up the phone and picked up Emma for their trip to the airport, she realized that her story had come full circle. She had started as a victim, survived as a fighter, and emerged as a symbol of hope for other women facing similar battles. The gilded prison had been destroyed. The phoenix had risen from the ashes, and Sarah Chen was finally free to write her own story. Emma's first word, spoken as they boarded the plane for their new adventure, was Mama, and Sarah knew that was the only title that had ever truly mattered.